Urgent alert out of Washington. Donald Trump has reacted with anger as Canada executes a surprising move right in the United States' backyard. In a step that caught American industry off guard, Canadian companies have secured multi-billion-dollar deals with Boeing, sending shockwaves from Seattle to Wichita and fueling fears of a steep drop in aerospace employment across the country's industrial heartland. None of this appeared out of thin air. For months, Trump touted that his combative tariff agenda would shield aerospace jobs from foreign rivals. From rallies in Ohio to Florida, he vowed that nations, especially Canada, would not dare squeeze American workers again. In 2024, the White House imposed broad surcharges on imported aircraft parts, sold as a shield for Boeing and for the tens of thousands employed across Missouri, South Carolina, and Washington state. The side effects were immediate. Strain with partners, jolted supply chains, and a stage perfectly set for today's board-flipping announcement, one that caught Trump off guard. Before we continue, hit like and subscribe. It's the quickest way to support the channel, and there's a lot more coming. Let's get to it. The tremor arrived in a single statement, straight from Ottawa. Canadian manufacturers and suppliers, backed by public incentives and international alliances, closed a string of Boeing supply and service contracts many had considered untouchable. These are not marginal agreements. They include long-term commitments to assemble fuselage sections, provide avionics, and deliver maintenance packages valued in multi-billion-dollar figures. Industry sources confirm the winning bids did not come from Seattle or St. Louis, but from hubs in Quebec and Ontario. For Boeing, this is a calculated pivot. Relieve the squeeze of domestic tariffs and spread production beyond the border. For Washington, the picture is harsh. An American industrial icon shifting critical work northward, placing essential steps in the hands of neighbors. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, Trump erupted on Truth Social, branding the move a betrayal of American workers and vowing countermeasures. Analysts underscored, this is not mere administrative housekeeping, it's a tectonic jolt. By relocating contracts, the United States risks ceding piece by piece the jewel of its industrial crown to a partner long treated as predictable. The domestic impact runs deep. This is not some routine reshuffle. It's a direct blow to workers, towns, and supply chains that rely on Boeing to breathe. From Everett, in Washington state, to Wichita, in Kansas, the aerospace corridor that once embodied American industrial muscle now faces the prospect of serial layoffs, shuttered hangars, and the erosion of trades that took generations to master. In St. Louis, Missouri, home to defense and space operations, the effect is more contained for national security reasons, but the commercial shock is already spider-cracking the wider ecosystem. Suppliers that fed both civilian and military lines now find themselves pinched by fewer orders and tighter margins. A single cancellation in St. Louis reverberates across the Midwest, striking subcontractors from specialty metals to cockpit electronics. One expert called it a domino effect. When Canada captures the anchor contract, the entire support architecture begins to wobble. And this isn't just spreadsheets, it's people. Neighborhoods built in the shadow of Boeing's hangars are facing existential questions. Around Everett, home prices pulse with the payroll. In Wichita, restaurants, schools, and hospitals rise or sink on the factory's stability. A 10% cut to payroll alone echoes through local services and chokes small businesses. Economists at Georgetown University estimate that for every aerospace job lost, as many as 3 surrounding jobs in retail, healthcare, and services can vanish. Scale that to thousands, and the horizon darkens. The shock hits the wider industrial base too. Building aircraft requires a vast national ecosystem: aluminum alloys in Pennsylvania, cabin components in Ohio, precision machining across multiple states. Redirect orders north, and those links suddenly lose their primary buyer. Purchase orders shrink, shifts thin out, lines go still. Electronics takes its own hit. Aircraft have become flying computers, navigation, radar, avionics. Much of that was produced from California to Texas. By moving avionics packages to Ontario, American suppliers that once dominated the segment watch projects evaporate. In Dallas, one executive summed it up: "We invested millions to scale for Boeing. Now that investment is stranded." Energy and raw materials get pulled into the current as well. Aircraft manufacturing gulps metals, fuels, and chemicals. If aviation slows in the United States, demand drops for aluminum smelters, steel mills, and rare earth plants across the Rust Belt. What began as a Boeing story morphs into slow-motion deindustrialization, and the fear of another manufacturing hollow-out returns. Politically, the timing could hardly be worse. Trump centered his campaign on reviving industrial jobs, especially in the swing states most battered by factory losses. Yet the picture is crystal clear. Tariffs designed to protect ended up pushing a national champion to seek oxygen abroad. In Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where national races are decided by razor-thin margins, pink slips in hangars and plants can trigger electoral earthquakes. Wall Street has already priced in the blow. Boeing shares slid within hours, wiping out billions in value. Should the disruption spread to more sensitive lines, analysts foresee further declines. Pension funds in Illinois, California, and New York, heavy with aerospace stocks, could face billion-dollar losses, and with them retirees' savings. North of the border, investor mood turned celebratory. Shares of Bombardier and other partners surged on the news. Trump's posture followed a familiar script. On Truth Social, he accused Ottawa of economic treason and threatened retaliatory surcharges on Canadian aerospace goods. At a hastily arranged presser, he vowed that America will not stand still while our jobs are stolen. Behind the bluster, however, the White House's real leverage looked short. Revenge tariffs would raise parts costs for airlines already squeezed by fuel and would not unwind contracts inked in Ottawa. Airlines, meanwhile, are collateral targets. Delta, American, and others rely on Boeing to refresh their fleets. Delays or bottlenecks could force them to look abroad, including to Airbus, further eroding the American manufacturer's lead. That prospect rattles executives and national security planners alike, who view aerospace dominance as a pillar of military readiness. Bottom line, the migration of contracts to Canada is not an isolated decision. It's a cascading crisis that touches jobs, towns, production chains, and by extension, national security. From Everett's humming factory floors to Wichita's quiet workshops, the shock is palpable. The aerial empire that once looked unshakable is revealing cracks. What's extraordinary is not only that Canada snagged work long tied to America's steel heart, but the method and what it lays bare about the shifting pendulum of economic power. For decades, aerospace was more than an industry. It was a symbol of global influence. The world bought Boeing planes for the product and for the American reliability stamp. By securing the contracts that keep the company breathing, Ottawa leaps from regional partner to first-tier competitor on the global board. None of this is luck. For years on end, Canada's government cultivated hubs around Montreal and Toronto, poured heavy investment into research and development, and stitched ties with European suppliers. Bombardier's climb in commercial aviation, modest beside Boeing and Airbus, nonetheless forged a replicable human and factory base. When Washington put up barriers, Canada's infrastructure was already positioned to absorb displaced demand. In practical terms, American trade policy planted the seeds of its own setback, and the effect reaches past economics. By capturing pieces of a U.S. champion's chain, Canada signals to allies and rivals alike: American industrial hegemony is no longer a foregone conclusion. From European to Asian capitals, the lesson is plain. American icons can be reconfigured by a neighbor with capacity and focus. The message travels beyond any single contract. It strikes at U.S. industrial prestige. Timing magnifies the scene. Just as Washington seeks to reassert centrality in global trade, it projects an inability to shield its standard-bearers. Ottawa, the historically quieter partner, capitalizes on someone else's protectionism to sell stability. The optics are unmistakable. While the American capital turns up the rhetoric and the tariffs, the Canadian capital closes deals, keeps jobs, and becomes shorthand for production reliability. In the world market, airlines from Asia to the Middle East are recalibrating purchases. If Canadian suppliers deliver faster, cheaper, and with less political noise, the supply chain's flow tilts north. Over time, Boeing's production center of gravity can shift, creating a Canadian mirror of America's old backbone, with critical hubs and stock in Montreal and Toronto. There's also the alliance chessboard. Aerospace intersects with defense, diplomacy, and sensitive technology. U.S. military exports, from fighters to surveillance platforms, depend on the industrial base's health. If Canada becomes a central linchpin in that machinery, its weight at NATO tables grows. European buyers already see Ottawa as a useful bridge between EU procurement rules and North American manufacturing. For Washington, that trims bargaining power where it once dominated. On the macro ledger, Canada peels away from classic vulnerabilities, energy, lumber, tariff spats, and adds a high-value counterweight. Diversifying through aerospace yields economic resilience and political muscle. In future fights over pipelines, minerals, or agriculture, negotiating with thousands of skilled jobs at your back changes the game. For the United States, the symbolic wound hurts as much as the financial one. For decades, presidents carried alongside their speeches a subtext: "We build the world's most advanced machines." If Boeing needs Canadian lines to meet targets, the narrative of strategic self-sufficiency loses force. Allies notice, rivals exploit, and neutral states quietly recalculate assumptions about where industrial leadership truly lies. Capital follows. Banks in London and Frankfurt are steering clients toward Canadian aerospace exposure, betting on continued contract wins under the shadow of US tariffs. Asian funds are making similar hedges. Once money flows north, it carves paths that are hard to reverse. The more capital moves north, the harder the reconquest south becomes. On the map, industrial geography is being redrawn. Roads that once ended in Seattle, Wichita, and Charleston now fork toward Montreal, Toronto, and Quebec City. Supply chains follow the roads, investors follow the chains, and then politics follows the money. For the American worker, the sting is immediate. For the world, the message is durable. Even allies will rewrite the balance when they see openings. By locking down Boeing's new tranche of work, Canada both secures jobs and declares that North America's industrial future will not be dictated solely in Washington. It is a siren, a warning, and a watershed. The plot doesn't stop here. The transfer of contracts opens a chapter of contest over aircraft manufacturing leadership and over the very notion of North American primacy. Pressure now sits on the White House. Trump is advertising chain reaction retaliation, tariffs on aerospace, and perhaps aluminum and steel. The risk, though, is a dog chasing its tail. US airlines are already fighting costs. Pricier parts could mean higher fares. Politically, it plays for weeks. Economically, it pushes more work offshore. Up on Capitol Hill, another crossroads. Lawmakers from Washington State, Kansas, and South Carolina want to know how Boeing let the contracts slip away. Hearings won't bring jobs back, and the more Boeing relies on Canada to stabilize production, the harder it becomes for Washington to steer the narrative. For Boeing, this is destiny-level decision-making. Hug its American roots and ride out political turbulence, or embrace a more distributed identity with Canada as a central node. Overexposure in either direction exacts a price. Too domestic, and the tariff wound reopens. Too northern, and relations with regulators and the defense complex sour. Striking the balance will shape the company's next decade more than any quarterly report. On Canada's side, a new phase begins, scaling capacity, keeping quality high, training labor, and hardening supply chains against shocks. Deliver now, and you lock in a durable place among aerospace's elite. Stumble, and the opening closes as fast as it appeared. Globally, everyone is watching. Airbus smells opportunity to peel customers in Europe, Africa, and Asia. China's COMAC, still years behind technologically, gains confidence with every American misstep. Russia, even while economically hobbled, spins any sign of US industrial slippage for propaganda. The next 5 years could decide whether the United States remains aerospace's undisputed leader or shares the mantle with rivals and, yes, allies. Sensitive commodities, aluminum, titanium, rare earths, will swing in volatility as orders cross borders. States reliant on mining and metallurgy could suffer if Canadian factories source closer to home. Energy demand shifts, logistics lanes redraw, and risk premia rise and fall. Each contract signed in Montreal or Toronto is another beacon for capital. Head north. At the center stands the American worker, waiting. From Everett to Wichita, families want to know whether their kids will inherit the jobs that built their cities, or whether the opportunity has crossed the border for good. For them, geopolitics shows up as a mortgage, a tuition bill, a retirement plan, all tied to whether Washington can bring work back home. The stakes are clear. Canada's advance does not end the story. It begins a hard test of America's ability to defend its industrial core in a world of flexible alliances and intensifying competition. The outcome won't just decide Boeing's future, it will weigh on the title of industrial superpower, whether it stays south or migrates contract by contract across the northern line. In the end, this is more than a headline. It's a flashing warning. One of America's emblematic sectors is being reformatted, not in Washington's offices or Seattle's lines, but in Ottawa's and Montreal's industrial parks. As rhetoric runs hot and factories brace for adjustments, the question isn't whether the shift matters, but how far it will go. Each contract captured, each line lit in Canada, tugs one more thread from America's industrial fabric. Whether that thread snaps here or unspools into a broader realignment, we will see in the months ahead. If this overview helped, drop a like, subscribe, and ring the bell to follow the next chapters. The global economy is spinning fast, and the next shock may already be on the way.